how Isaiah train city ya hit tuji kuti hunach shawa train hawe isiti ya hatat gituch gunas chish hunt yiguti. I have welcomed you from in my back, from the symbols of my tribe, to the place that the wind is coming from now, the southeast, and now where you are sitting in front of me. The name is the most important of all possessions of life, and I have called your name to be in my house, and you have given my house honor, and my house gives you honor. Oh, Yahweh, Erica, Chish, thank you. I'm going to sit now.
Good morning, Jim. I am happy to have you on our What Fuels You podcast. It's an honor to have you. Thank you for the warm greeting. And so you are so kind to speak with us today and share your story. And so you are a Tlingit headman from Alaska. Can you just start right in and tell me about your wonderful self?
Okay, at first, I guess I should tell you that when the Europeans came to the United States, as you know, in Europe, England, Spain, Germany, the various countries, there could only be one king. And so it was when they came here and met someone that they thought was like a king, or at least someone who led the people, then they gave them the term chief, because they obviously could not call the person king, except in Hawaii. And so our preference is not the word chief, although it is used commonly throughout Indian America. The way we understand it in my tribe is that there is one who stands to the front, the head man, and we say, Kashate Hani. And really the interpretation is the one who, Kasha is the forehead, the one who puts his forehead to the front and faces the enemy before the people, no matter what that enemy is. And often it was the weather, because we lived in such dangerous places. So the responsibility of the headman was the survival of the tribe.
This is going to be so much fun talking with you.
Goodness, Chish, that means thank you.
And so tell me again, how do you pronounce the name of your tribe, and how do you spell it?
Okay, Tlingit. The air comes out of here, sla, sla. The tongue is up against the front. Our language is a little difficult this way. Tlingit. And if we spell it, I spell it, at least TL in parentheses. Tlingit. Okay. Do you want to know my name?
Yes, I was going to ask you that. I didn't ask you that when we talked the other day.
Okay. If you could see my regalia, it is the mountain. I will stand just for a minute. You can see the mountain, and then the people of the mountain and the central being. So my name is Shah Yikan. Shah is the mountain, and it could be interpreted several ways. Yit Ayit Han, standing below the mountain in protection, is the name that I was given. However, there's another way of interpreting which I like the best. The one who causes the sun to rise on the mountain. gun, shayi gun, yan gun, the sun is shining. And so those two, I like being a protector, and I especially like bringing sunlight to this 18,000 foot mountain just outside of my hometown. And then I have another name, and that is Qatsati. Really, it's not very well interpretable, but it's a name given to the great chiefs. And I'm the only one that carries that name. And it also was carried by Chief Shakes in southeastern Alaska, I believe. So it's a big name, but it designates the power of the being.
I'm going to be in complete awe during this whole conversation because I'm so excited talking with you. So tell me about you said it's called a headman versus chief. So how did the chief start again and the headman turn?
Well, basically, chief came from the English, of course, the English speakers, because they had no other name. Our word for it, of course, is not chief, but the one who stands to the front. If you're in the canoe, the chief, as we say, stands to the front, the forehead to the front. So when we go to war, for example, the two chiefs meet in their canoes, war canoes, and they're all gathered around, and the chiefs stand in front. They're not up on a hillside looking down on a bunch of little ants that they could care less about. But when they meet face to face, they ask each other, Wasiyakatuwanuk, what is it that we are doing here? And the other chief might say, I don't know. Because sometimes chiefs are driven to war by sub-chiefs, by people who manipulate the people of the tribe.
Which seems pretty common still in today's culture, huh?
Yes, the full story is amazing. I like to tell that story in big audiences as to how we resolved those issues, and that why it was so important that the one who stands to the front stands to the front. You can't be a chief and sit back there.
Wow. So tell me a little bit about where the Tlingits are located in Alaska, and you were talking about the different clans.
Okay, the Tlingits themselves, we're a mixed bunch, even as Tlingits, because we come from all over southeastern Alaska. Southeastern Alaska is that panhandle that runs below Canada. If you can imagine the line that comes down and separates Canada from Alaska, you follow that line all the way down to the end. There's a little bay there called Yakutat Bay, and that's where my hometown is. It's real easy to find because of that line. Now, we're the northernmost of the Tlingits, and then the Tlingits range 600 miles all the way down to Ketchikan, and then back into Canada. So we're a huge nation of people. And the tragedy is, I guess I could digress here a little bit. I happen to sit on what is called the Council of Traditional Scholars. This is a body created by the Sea-Alaska Corporation, which is one of our corporations formed under the Alaska Native Land Claims, and I can get to that later. But it is well endowed. They have an endowed foundation called the Sea-Alaska Heritage Foundation. And that foundation has this little body called the Council of Traditional Scholars, and I sit on that council. Now, the importance of this council is that even though there are 20,000 of us around the world who are Tlingit or from Tlingit heritage, there are only 40 to 50 of us left who speak the language. And that is a tragedy. And so we do our best as the few who are remaining to try to speak in Tlingit. We have interpreters, and I'm still not happy exactly with the way we do it. I would like to show how we speak Tlingit and break the sentences down in English to show you how we speak backwards. You know, I've been accused of talking Klingon, for example. And I think structurally in sentences, we speak more like Yoda. It's beautiful when you write because you don't always start with a noun, you know. We mix them all over the place. We run descriptions way before we come to the being.
Can you give me an example? Like this is interesting. So maybe give me an example of how you break down a sentence.
Yesh is raven. I don't know if you can see my raven up here. He's so dark. Raven, okay. Yesh ayu yakanakut. Raven, it was he walking was down the road. That's the way it is. Or we could say hindakwasitan, and it bothers me when I hear young people say, I say to them, how do you say it's raining outside? And they say hindakwasitan. I said, that's good. So what does it mean? It's raining. And I said, no, hin is water, dak is tumbling down. Wasitan, there are many, and that becomes rain. And that's how intricate all of this is. And as people learn to speak it nowadays, we have teachers who teach the language. Some of them heard it wrong. And it's very difficult because then they end up teaching it wrongly. So it's very delicate. It's beautiful if a person or if a nation could hold on to its tongue. That's the beauty of Europe. You know, you could speak a little bit of German in the United States, but man, when you're in Germany, you speak it full blast, you know, and get all of the meaning out of it. We don't have that anymore.
Do you think there's any hope for getting traditional language back, or is it just slowly disappearing and that's how it's gonna go?
I think if the effort remains funded, even though the language is taught wrong and you know the nuances are different and so forth, I think it could last and come back a little bit, but not with the meaning and not with the cultural implications that are there. I mean, culture has changed for everyone.
Yep. So tell me about, you were saying that when you come from a long line of chiefs, of headmen, and that your mom sat down and taught you the qualities, and that you didn't want to maybe perhaps take on this role, right?
Yeah, let me tell you a couple of things. I don't know, yeah, I guess if I bring my raven down here, this is of course my raven, this is my moiety. There are two moieties among the Tlinkits, and you have to understand this so that you begin to understand how the headman, now on the side of the raven, of course,
Wait, could you
is the
start?
eagle.
could you start over with the Raven because the internet went out?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's my fault too. I'm at a hotel, so maybe start with just bring down the Raven again and let's start from there.
Okay. Now, I treasure the Raven because I am. If you look at my regalia, you'll see that the Raven is worn on my headdress and so forth. So the Raven is my favorite symbol. But the Raven is the moiety. There are two moieties primary based on anthropology and so forth. So the mother carries the line. So the mother, if my mom was Raven, therefore I'm Raven. My sister is Raven. Doesn't matter the sex of the child, you're Raven if your mom is. Now, mom cannot marry within the Raven clan, within the Raven moiety. Mom must marry across to the eagle side, the eagle moiety. So the father is not as powerful as the mother because she carries the strength of the family. And if you have like thinking mothers, it becomes problematical for chiefs. So the other thing, of course, is we did not have women chiefs, but we had matrilineal mothers, not matriarchs, matrilineal mothers who at times had more power and control over the men and their chieftainship. So that's the balance. It's a wonderful balance that's come over and over the years. Of course, now everybody wants to change things. Modern ladies want to be chiefs now. And I'm sure it will happening in some places. And what can you do? We can live with our culture in history and just hope that the new culture that's coming along will not totally destroy that which is so wonderful and powerful as it is. So now the question you asked me was?
I like how when we were talking, you were talking about the strength of women and the role women played with the headman and within the tribe. And you explained a little bit right now with the clan, but like you would say that the woman, the wife, would sit with the headman and grunt or make a noise to guide the conversation a little bit.
Oh yes, and then I'll get back to my mother's teaching me. In today's world, you know, it is with feminism, and I have to be careful here because I talk from historical perspective, not from today's world. But I have to observe today's world in which women think that they automatically and can control the society or the tribe. It's not so important anymore because we've lost our language. Our culture is going away. But in the old days, you know, you could say, well, women should have been chiefs. In a sense, they were. So the man being the chief, and I'll tell you what's difficult about being a chief after a little bit. That person can sit in council with other chiefs. Now you've got two major chiefs. You've got moiety chiefs and you've got chiefs of clans, sub-clans. My sub-clan is Owl, so I have an owl on my back. So when it comes down to these major discussions that can go for days, I mean, I don't know how they don't just collapse from being tired. But they go on and they repeat history we didn't write. So one of the ways we kept things straight was for the chiefs to talk to each other and tell stories. And sometimes if a chief starts going off, a bit of history in or sense of, uh, his wife sitting behind him, who carries her own tribe, his kids, can grunt. She'll go, at that moment, the chief will shut up. He won't say a word. And the other chief will know that he was wandering because his wife warned him. And that will alert the other wife of the opposite tribe. And now they become alert. And it becomes, without even talking, it becomes a challenge of communicating with your wife on one side, with your wife over here, and trying to figure out what it was that you said that was wrong. Because if you continued in the wrong direction, you would go to war. I mean, simple things like that. And the woman was the keeper of stories. She was the keeper of truth, and she was the keeper of strength, because she made sure the chief did not wander off somewhere, which we like to do nowadays. Fake news.
Oh, and tell about the qualities of being a chief and your mom sitting down with you when you were little.
Yeah, my mother was the daughter of one of the greatest chiefs of Tlinkits. They say he was the equivalent of Chief Shakes in the South, and his name was Carditu, Jim Carditu. One of the pronunciations was Kaya Ditu, and also Uchkakeya Dakwech, big chief. He was so big that when people would gossip and try to challenge his greatness, he tore down. He had a big clan house, community house that was his, and it was called the Bear Hand House, the Brown Bear Hand, and it was the only one, and he had that. That was his. And he built the thing, had a huge potlatch, what they called potlatch. We call it kuich, calling together. Had a big potlatch. And of course, because he's a chief, he's wealthy. He gives out all these gifts, and then he tears it down. He did this 7 times in the same location, and he held a potlatch for everyone. And he didn't have to say a word. He just said, "Can you do that?" You know. So, and he had his own river, everything. Main chief. So, my mother was his daughter, but see, he was Tequeti. He came from the Bear Hand House, which is under Eagle. They're actually equal. Eagle and Bear are equal, but they allocate them to the Eagle so that they can do proper marriages. So my mother her tribe comes from its own set of chiefs. And so I come from both sides. My blood carries chieftanism from both sides. So my mother, when I was young, would sit me down and she would say, "I have to tell you some stories. And it's very important because you may not like it when it comes to you, but it will come, and you will be called on, or you will simply become the head man. If not of the whole moiety, you will become the head man of our clan and the subclans. The subclans will have their own headmen, but you will be over all of them." And so I was curious, is that a big deal? You know, is it a nice thing to be a chief? And she said, it is not big uh, prideful thing. You don't become chief to be proud, to have people rushing up to you and hugging you all the time and praising your power. Your job is to make sure that the tribe never dies. That's your job, because we're very few. We're only maybe a couple hundred here on this shore, 400 miles, hundreds of miles. And you have to make sure that your tribe survives. And that's why we say, Hashate Hani, the one who puts the forehead first, because your enemy could be the opposite tribe. The enemy could be tribes from other places. The enemy mostly will be nature, because you have to be as smart as the wind. You have to be as smart as the water, the breakers. You have to be as smart as the forest and everything that's in it. But she said, the most important is this. You have to control the people. We have laws. And of course, in today's world, we say gray of law. There were no grays of law. If you did something wrong, even as a young teenager, especially if you gossiped or if you said ugly things about chiefs and chieftain families, or even each other, depending on your stature. If you do that, your sentence is death. That's not a chief's law. That is tribal law. And the tribe is gathered when that occurs. So now she says, let us say that your brother, your auntie, Tla is mother, Tla, my mother. Tla, that little gives the mother a littleness, my little mom. My auntie, who is the sister of my mother, is my little mom. And I love her just as much, sometimes more than my mother. Great love. So her son is my brother rather than cousin. So my mother says, now, your brother is brought before you. You are sitting there in the middle of the circle of people, and they're all watching. They all know what has to be done. He has committed an act for which he must be put to death. She said, you will have to sit there and you will have to listen to your little mom, your auntie, weep and plead for her son. That's your brother. And you know what you're going to do. And she said, you cannot, your face cannot twitch. Your lips cannot move. You cannot allow a tear to form in your eyes. You're listening to your auntie and you're watching and looking into her eyes. And then you must look at your brother and say, you will now be put to death. And that is the role of the chief. It's not glamorous. But if the chief doesn't do that, gossip will go rampant. Things will go bad. The tribe will fight within itself, and the tribe will die because nature will kill them. And that's why you must do the role of the chief properly. You know, after I listened to my mom and I thought about it going to bed, I decided I don't want to be a chief, not ever, not ever. How could I take someone that I love so much, pronounce her son to death, and not even weep? And then in another lesson, my mother said to me, she says, now, here's the other difficult part of your job, your role as a head man. Everybody looks up to you for strength. They don't look up to you for, popularity. They look up to you for strength. So when a member of the tribe dies, either tribe, raven or eagle, doesn't matter, in that realm, then you must come to the place where the body is held and the people are gathered. And you must stand up before the people. You must talk words of strength. And then you must express your sorrow. And she said, you must weep loudly in front of the people. That will be expected of you. And I thought, wow. On the one hand, where my love is so needed, I cannot express any emotion. On the other hand, where there is someone laying here that is not even closely related, or I don't even know that well, I must weep for that being with as much compassion as I can. But really, you are weeping for the family. You are expressing the family sorrow, and you are expressing the tribe's sorrow. And that's when honor comes to you, and respect, and people gladly follow your instructions. Tough lessons, tough lessons. It's not glamorous to be a head man.
Wow. And what brought you, so you're in Alaska, what brought you to Washington, D.C. and then to Washington? You've got quite an impressive history of what you've done.
Oh, we could sit for hours on all of the wonderful, crazy things that have happened to me. I come from that little village of 250 people. I went to Sheldon Jackson High School in Sitka, Alaska. And then in the middle of my sophomore year, I quit. Well, in those days, no big deal. There's no such thing as dropout. So I went home to my mother. I went home with my mother. They were down there. And the teachers were in shock. I was like a favorite student. And so the teachers from Holland, Michigan, they were wonderful people. That's how we spoke English so well. They insisted. This is way back when now, early 50s. And they conspired, talk about conspiracies. They conspired with my parents for me to go and live with his parents in Holland, Michigan. Now you talk about that experience. I'd never flown in any big jets or anything like that. There's a story all to itself about my trek across the United States in one of the first jets. And Ma Karsten was, and that's what I call her, Ma and Pa Karsten. They were my Michigan parents. And then I'd come home and fish and so forth. But Ma Karsten was a professor of piano at the Hope College in Holland. I eventually went there. And Pa Karsten was the head of public works, and he was also, thankfully for me, head of Tulip Time. And in Tulip Time, Oldsmobile gave wonderful, what do they call those cars? Convertibles, and guess who got to drive one of those? And the princesses had to sit on the back of the car. This was the one Indian boy that was just totally happy, So after I came back to Alaska, I ran a radio station in Cordova, and that was much fun. And then I was called into Anchorage, Alaska, where I was made a part of the Alaska Federation of Natives. This was the beginning of the huge fight for the restoration of Alaska and its lands to the Alaska Native people. We say native because we're not all Indians. We're Indian, Eskimo, and Aleut. So if you look at the Aleutian Islands, the base word is Aleut. So those are the Aleuts. And then up around the ridge of Alaska, west and up on the north, are two sets of Eskimos, two different kinds of Eskimo people. And then there's the bulk in the middle called Athabascan Indians. And they wandered out a little bit. And I happened to come from Athabascan country, way back in history. And we came down into Yakutat, and then the Aleuts, the Athabascans, formed on into various portions of the different tribes. So that's how we became a powerful spokespeople. Now, I'm going to digress here again a little bit, and I hope I'm not boring you to death. We were extremely successful as Alaska Native people because we were all young. We were in our 30s, 20s and 30s. But when we were in the 8th grade in all of Alaska, we graduated. That was the most you could go. So they would ship all of us, Eskimos from Barrow, the Aleuts, all the way from Dutch Harbor. The Tlinkits came on floating planes, and the Athabascans from Fairbanks and so forth. And we ended up in two schools. Sheldon Jackson was a Presbyterian school. It was small. It wasn't a big one. You had to pay tuition to go there. And then the BIA school, Bureau of Indian Affairs, had a high school in Mount Edgecombe. So every kid, can you imagine this? Every kid that was in 9th grade ended up at these two schools. And Mount Edgecombe was on an island. Sitka was on the mainland. They're right across from each other. And we used to go by what they called shoreboat, became real competitors. So here's what happened. Everybody in Alaska that was young, 20, 30, knew each other. And so when the Alaska Native land claims was fought and settled, they couldn't fight us because we all knew each other as Native leaders. Isn't that something? It's almost as if Providence had looked at it for us. The big settlement was 1 billion. Well, back then that was a horrendous amount of money. This is 1971. And so I became the public relations director of the Alaska Federation of Natives that represented all of these people. And I was also a member of the board of directors. So I was influential in the settlement of the Alaska Native land claims. And then I moved to Washington, D.C. while I was PR director. D.C. heard about me and they said, "We want you." So I went to Washington, D.C., became the PR director there and the contracts officer for the National Congress of American Indians. So I was a part of representing the entire nation of tribes in the United States. And while I was doing this, I got tapped on the shoulder and was asked if I would be interested in being a part of the vice president's team, vice president of the United States. And I didn't know any better. I said, sure, And so I became a speechwriter, editor, could go in and out of the White House and so forth. It was a fun time. And of course, the tribes really got to know who I was. I was one of the few first Indians to be in such a powerful position. I had no power, but influence is power. And I did a lot of good for the tribes from that position. And from there, I formed my own company, and I really represented the Indians, about 100 tribes throughout the United States over time. And we can talk about social change. The way I brought social change was through the restoration of lands to the tribes. So I'll quit there so I don't just totally put you to sleep.
I'm loving this. Please continue.
Excuse me, I'm going to have a sip of my coffee. So I would love to tell you about some of the intricate things that are not written that were so important. You know, in today's world, beginning with Obama and even with Clinton, they would take people back to Washington, D.C., tribal members, and you'd have all these 500 people come down, sit in a big hall, and the president would come and say hello, shake hands, take pictures. In the old days, when I was just getting started and our tribes were just getting going, depending on the kinds of friendships we had in the White House, in the Vice President's office, in the Senate, in the House, we had literal access to the President of the United States, to the Vice President. We had real access. I could sit down with Henry Jackson. I could sit down with Ted Kennedy. In fact, I wrote for Ted Kennedy. I'm so proud because I wrote one testimonial document that went into the congressional record, in which the lawyers reviewed it and they made only one grammatical change. Everything else was legally correct. I was very proud of that. So I knew all these people. It was wonderful. We had lots of influence. So as I'd like to just give you one example of, if you ask me, Jim, would you say that you might have been responsible for some direct social change? And I would say yes, through the restoration of land. Mount Adams, for example, in Washington State, it's a beautiful 14,000 foot mountain, 12,000 foot mountain. It was in the hands of the Forest Service, and the tribe had very little say-so over it. And they would allow climbers to go up and so forth. And the tribe was very concerned. So, and it was theirs initially. And so they went to court, and after about 80 years of fighting in the Indian Claims Commission and so forth, they were simply given, I think it was 6 months, to settle up and just walk away. And they offered them $80,000 for the whole one side of the mountain. They couldn't go for the other side because it had already fallen into third-party hands. So they came to me. By this time, I had my little firm in Washington, D.C., and they flew in, walked in my door and said, the lawyers have failed us, and we want you as a PR man, as a man who's been in the White House, to represent us. I knew nothing about this stuff, so it was wonderful. We went through the 6 months, and the court gave us an extension. By this time, we're just hustling like mad to get public support. And as things went on, we got bits of support. Mainline churches were very good for this kind of support. The Friends Committee of uh, the Quakers, uh, really came to us with support. And then I remember I had the first, nowadays we've got all these computers. People have no idea what it was like in the older days. I bought a machine that was called the Mag Cart machine. And you feed it a bunch of addresses, and then it spins through, and they're notched, spins through, and it typed 200 letters a day. Oh, I was on top of the world. The tribe thought I was the most magical person in the world. And we got letters out to the nation. And we started getting responses. And what we needed was a presidential declaration of restoration of Mount Adams to the tribe. And oh, that was a fight. It was a fight. I have huge articles on it. But in 14 months, we won. And it happened at the Lummi Indians live right across from me. I live on Lummi Island in Washington. The Lummi Indians are right across, and they had me representing them with introducing their beautiful fish to the nation. So we had this wonderful, huge dinner at the National Press Club. By the way, I was the first American Indian into the National Press Club as a member. And it was at that dinner that the assistant to the president got up and said, "I wish to bring you greetings from the President of the United States. And he is very pleased at your invitation to all of us to be here at your dinner. We thank the Lummies for introducing this beautiful salmon and fish to the world." And he said, "I also want to bring you a special message from the President of the United States, in that he just this evening, as I walked out of his office, signed the restoration of Mount Adams to the Yakama Nation." Ah, we wept. It was amazing. We won, and we pulled it back out of Forest Service, and that mountain today stands as a symbol to the people. So it may not be huge social change, but that mountain holds the culture and the spirituality of the people intact while this crazy world tries to change everybody. I did the same at Taos Blue Lake. There was a girl, and this is the first time I'm telling this in public, and I will have to write all these things down. When we gathered at Taos Blue Lake, Vice President's office was there, and some of the senators and so forth. Huge celebration, calling for the restoration and support of Taos Blue Lake. From the lake flows this beautiful little stream. I have a picture of me sitting by it with my hand in the water. You could just feel the spirituality. And so, of course, we invited Nixon, we invited Vice President Agnew to all of these events. And actually, Taos came before Mount Adams. But at Taos Blue Lake, of course, it was announced Vice President couldn't make it, the President couldn't make it. However, the Vice President had sent his daughter, Kim Agnew, to the event. She was, I think, 15 years old. And of course, at first the Indians were grumbling, "Oh, how dare they send a little girl when we asked for the Vice President of the United States," a typical Indian us, And what came out of that was amazing. And I don't think it's written anywhere, because my boss, who knew the better inner workings of the vice president's office, told me one day, he said, you know, we made such an impression on bringing Kim out there. What they did was they put her on a horse. The caciques of New Mexico, the Pueblos, use a blanket that they put around their head like this, just a plain blanket. And they're usually in their 80s, and they walk as leaders. The caciques put her on the horse, and they led the horse up the trail to the lake, Taos Blue Lake. And then, of course, they brought her back with the ceremonies. But when that little girl sat with her dad, now we're talking about 500 people sitting in a place saying, oh, I met with the president. This little girl said to her dad, these people are really spiritual. She said, you know what? They would not allow a horse's leg to break a twig as we went to the lake. She said, that's how much they love their land. Within a month, Taos Blue Lake had an audience with the President of the United States. And even before that with Agnew. Same with Mount Adams. They flew her to the foot of Mount Adams, and she looked over the expanse. Bob Jim, the great chairman of Yakama Nation, talked to her about the spirituality of the mountain, that it is their strength, it is their ability to hold faith, and it is the keeper of their horses. The Yakimas had lots of horses on their land and their trees, beautiful country. And he said, we need control of this. The government is destroying it. They're allowing just anyone to go up there now without any control. If we have it, it will be strictly controlled. And again, the little girl talked to her dad and said, you can't believe how spiritual these people are. And within a few weeks, the Yakama were called into the audience of the vice president. And within, I think, about a month again, they were in with President Nixon. And from that point on, Nixon indicated his interest. And of course, from there, it went to Mitchell, it went to the attorney generals and so forth. And it took us 14 months to win that mountain, but we won. I always follow this little saying from some of the good books that come to us. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to that mountain, move, and it will move. Mount Adams moved from the US government into the hands of the Yakama Nation. That's social change like you can't just bring about all the time.
And you called it in our conversation, symbols of change, sacred symbols, right?
Yes, yes. The mountain is a sacred symbol. Taos Blue Lake, if you go there today, I think they finally brought in electricity to that place about 10 years ago, but they didn't even have electricity. If you're ever there, go to that little river that flows through Taos Blue Lake, the reservation, and kneel by it and put your hands in it. You will experience something magical, truly. And the people are so wonderful. Indian people everywhere are wonderful. if you take the time to get to know them. And the one thing that bothers me, if I may say so, is that oftentimes people who are truly interested in our Indian people ask questions from a conclusive bent. If you're truly interested in the Indian, ask a question and then let them tell you. But too many times we'll come to an Indian and say, oh, I hear that, this means that and that means that. Once you do that, the tribal members will just go away and say, know too much already. So.
You talked about some changes in culture. What is advice what's your hope for the future going forward with where we're at currently in society and with the world and how we care for our planet?
I think there are some of our tribes, as you go across the country, especially in the plains, where they have lots of powwows. The powwows are wonderful for children. They're good for our children, Indian children, because it roots them. It roots them in the drumming. The greatest admirers of American Indians in the world are the Germans. The Germans, and strangely, some of us with our language almost have Germanic tongues. The way we, Achtung, Achtung, and we say, Igwayachwan, be brave. See? Anyway, these people have tribal count. They have tribes and clans. They know more about Tlinkits than I do. It's amazing. And I love that. That kind of interest. When the Germans hear the drum, I think it's true with most Europeans. When they hear that drum, it pulls up history and ancestry, because every European, we like to call them white people, in Tlingit we call a woman Gleit Shawat. Gleit is snow, Shawat is woman, snow woman, white woman. And a man is Gleit Ka, snowman, So we're not calling them white people, we're saying snow people. It's just amazing how in our cultures we have ways of instilling. Children are still the most magical learners. And along with our children, we've finally begun a curriculum in our schools in the United States for children. And unfortunately, they're limited to Indian children. The curriculum should belong to everybody, to all children to experience. Because how do you teach the love of earth? That is the true love of the American Indian, his mother, the earth, and all that the earth brings forth. I'll make available to you a picture of me standing among of the cedars. This is not exactly one of them, but I don't know if you can see that. You see the big cedars behind me? Now, I think I have sent you one that shows me standing right in the cedars themselves. And the way we believe is that, of course, we believe in using the cedar and other trees for canoes, for our totem poles, and so forth. And but I was a member of a foundation in which we put up $6,000, and we purchased a tree that was going to be given away, was going to be sold. We purchased this from the state of Washington, and we gave the title immediately to the Makah Indian Nation. They live out on the coast. And it was a huge, huge cedar tree. When it came down, I mean, the earth shook. But they had no way of achieving cedars for their canoes, for their totem poles, and so forth. So in the ceremony, and I was there before the cutting, I talked to the tree, and I thanked the tree for the years that it had stood there, maybe thinking nobody had seen it, but it had seen thousands, hundreds of years that stood, and every ring within it, and all of the bark, and all of the sounds that it heard and absorbed, and brought history into itself and in the beauty. And even as it stood, it told its story to those who would stop and listen. And it would tell the story of the history of everything it saw there. And so we thanked the tree for giving of itself in all of this time, but that it was not going to become nothing. When it became a canoe, a big war canoe, and it plied the waters of Puget Sound with the tribes, it would still carry the stories that it knew into the world of other nations. That's one of our touches of culture. The fish have fabulous stories that we tell. And in all of our legendary, those of us who live on water and even on land, we talk to them and thank them for taking on the role of life, so that when we take them, our life continues. And we ask them to give us the same visions that they had. So that's the way we kept from wasting. And this is something we have to teach children. We want to teach them money, teach them respect of the earth. You know, tlutk, when you walk along a trail, you pick up the dirt, and we call it tlutk. That's earth, dirt. Tlutk, being settled upon by people, is called on. Ah, Ani, my village. But it takes the earth to bring about the village. And then the village takes care of the earth and everything that is on the earth and in the water. That is what our children have to learn. They have to learn the beauty of the birds. They have to learn to listen to the birds. They have to listen to this guy. Oh, he tells stories, amazing stories. I have friends in California, and one of my brothers has adopted them, and he sits on their deck and on their well, what do they call that, railing?
The
And
raven.
he talks to them every morning, you know, and we could learn so much from the animals. If we could learn to teach children to love those things more than to hate humankind, which is what we're beginning to do. We're teaching hate even from the level of government. And it's something that can only be stopped if children learn to love the earth. Not wantonly, not where we stop everything from ever happening, but to love it all working together. So
This
that's
is
my
so
message of
wonderful. Oh my gosh. Is there
acculturating
anything else
children.
you wanted to share before we part our ways for now?
I think I am happy with our meeting, uh, with the stories I have told you, and some things that I've said now that have not been heard before, at least not from me. And the need to not become discouraged. I become discouraged knowing that there are only 40 of us, 50 of us possibly at best, who can sit down and talk to each other and laugh. Indian stories are really funny. And sometime I could, maybe when we have time to talk with the children, I'll tell them a story about the little birdie. I do it with most grade schools. And I have adults who come across my path nowadays who say, Jim, and that's the little birdie story. So it lasts. Indian and stories. And how fascinating last. It is as to what you are doing. And I'm going to ask you to send me a picture of your car towing that little house. That's going to be neat. And what you are doing, of course, I think is absolutely necessary. And I thank you for that. And I thank your sponsors. I thank your little house. I bless your little house. And, I think the other thing that we need to know as children is that there is nothing wrong with being spiritual. My spirituality is the universe. I believe the universe is one and the same as me. When I look inside my body, I am amazed at exactly how I'm almost a replica of the universe. And so I think when my body gives things up, I simply go back and join that universe. And what I have learned here and know here will be of no significance, except maybe a little bit here and there, as I go back and find what beauty there is in that universe that, gets into all kinds of trouble itself with black holes and everything else, colliding suns. So, there's some people who say, I have to see it. I don't believe in anything spiritual or religious. And yet they'll look up at the sky and they'll say, oh, what beauty those stars are. Not knowing or even realizing that millions of years ago, those lights went out. And yet the light comes through, never ends.